Okay, well, I think we should get started. Well, thank you, Guru, for joining us in today's webinar. So all of you know that in this webinar, we're going to talk about the EU AI Act and what to expect from it. And I wanted to give Guru the chance to introduce himself. If you want to say a few things about yourself.
Yeah, happy to. Monica, thanks for having me. Excited for this partnership with NIMCO, not just in this webinar, but going forward, and we can chat about that towards the end of the conversation. Uh, for the audience, my name is Guru Sethupathi. I'm a founder and CEO of FairNow, and I've been in the AI space for about 20 years. First half of that was in my academic days. I have a PhD in economics and an undergraduate in computer science, and so really focused on AI and how to build AI systems and technologies, but also how to ensure that they work well. And in the last decade or so, I've been at McKinsey and Capital One, again, leading large teams, building AI solutions, but in a responsible fashion. The key thing as we go through this AI Act, a couple of things you'll notice, or you may not notice, but you'll learn, is that they really borrow, a lot of these regulations really borrow from past kind of conformity assessment type things, both in the product space, which Monica will talk about, as well as in the financial services space. So at the time, so while I was at Capital One, we really had to spend a lot of time thinking about model governance, model risk management, et cetera. And there's a lot that's borrowed here in the EU AI Act. So I think you'll see some of those patterns and so on and so forth. And so fair now, we build technology to really help you manage your governance as it pertains to these laws, these regulations, but also business risk as well. And so we'll talk through all of those things in the next 45 minutes or so. But glad to be here. Handing it back to you, Monica.
Great. Thanks, Guru, for the nice introduction. I'm gonna share my slides so you can see what the agenda is gonna look like. Okay, it's gonna show like this. I believe, do you see my first slide? Yes, right? Yeah, okay. So, 1 second. There you go. So, we already introduced Guru as our guest speaker. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Monica Fernandez. I'm the head of AI assurance at NEMCO. I have actively been involved in projects the past few years that advocate for responsible AI through like education, research, and some policy work. But most recently, I've been working on an EU project about AI bias, looking into exploring the implications of AI bias and how it relates to like ethical, legal, and social challenges that we encounter with it. I hold a master's in artificial intelligence, so I have a bit of a technical background and a bachelor's in neuroscience from University of Edinburgh. So we'll get started. So because there's no time to waste, but in the agenda, I'm going to briefly introduce the AI Act. I assume a lot of you already know what it is, what it involves, but I just want to cover the basics very quickly, just in case, make sure that we are all on the same page. Also mention like why is it important, or why should we care about the AI Act, especially why should a NEMCO customer care about the AI Act? And then I wanted to have a bit of a discussion with Guru, since we can take the chance that we have him here and his knowledge as well to steer a little bit of discussion. So I will get started. So as you know, the AI Act aims to foster trustworthy AI in the European Union and Europe and beyond, to ensure that AI systems respect fundamental human rights, safety, and ethical principles by addressing its risks. And the AI Act defines an AI system using this very long definition that is based on the definition from the OECD. But But just to simplify it, basically says an AI system is a machine-based system that has some degree of autonomy, that it has objectives, that it infers inputs from its inputs how to generate outputs, and it can influence the environment. So the AI Act aims to cover systems that fall under this definition. Now, as a lot of you may already know, it uses a risk-based approach where it categorizes AI systems based on their risk, from those with unacceptable levels of risk to those with defined as high-risk AI systems, and then those that have less risk or no risk at all, or the minimal risk. So at the top here of the pyramid, we can see that we have those with unacceptable risk. Those would be prohibited. They're considered prohibited AI practices. And then we have high-risk AI systems. That is the core of the AI Act, actually. So most of it speaks around high-risk AI systems and the requirements that they must go through. And one of the main things is that they must undergo a conformity assessment. And here I just have a note that Annex 1 and 3 are give a list of those that are considered high risk AI systems. So in Annex 1, the Annex 1 type, there are those that are part of safety components of already regulated products, where there is already regulation out there. And Annex 3 provides a list of standalone high-risk AI systems. And then we have certain AI systems which are considered to have less risk, but they must still adhere to a lot of transparency requirements. And then we have minimal risk AI systems. Oops. Okay. Oh, I went too fast. Sorry about that. Then separate from that, the AI Act also addresses general purpose AI models with systemic risk, and those are treated separately and they have their own set of requirements and obligations in order to put these systems in the market, in the EU market. Now, as for obligations, like I said, most of the obligations are meant for high-risk AI systems, but just to mention a few of them, some key obligations involved, that a high-risk AI system, they must register in the EU AI database, and these are especially for those high-risk AI systems listed in Annex 3, which are these standalone AI systems. They must go through some post-market monitoring, and they must report any incidents that may occur throughout its life cycle and after they've been deployed and it's being in use. They must also go through a fundamental rights impact assessment. Every provider should make one of these, do one of these, and there should be a lot of record keeping. Then for general purpose AI, these, and I say general purpose AI from Article 50, these fall under the certain AI systems that go through a lot of transparency requirements. Some of these obligations involved, as some technical documentation that must be provided to both the AI office and deployers of these systems. Then they also have to comply with EU copyright law, and they must do some watermarking in order to ensure that if something has been artificially made, it is made known to the user that it's been generated by artificial intelligence. And then some disclosure obligations. So whenever it is not obvious, you must tell the user that they are, for example, interacting with an AI, if in the case that they're interacting with a chatbot, for example. Now, for general purpose AI models with systemic risk, then these have to undergo through a lot of testing, more than usual, because of the type of risk that they come with. And so there must be a lot of model evaluation to be taken place. They must assess and mitigate these risks once identified. And of course, a lot of technical documentation and again, incident reporting. If anything comes up, this must be reported immediately. Or there is a defined amount of days in which you would need to report these incidents. And you have to ensure an adequate level of cybersecurity. But like I said, these are only a couple of the key requirements. The list is obviously more extensive than those. But like I said, I just wanted to give a brief overview of the AI Act. I think it's also important to mention the roles of that there are in the AI ecosystem. We have providers. A provider is a person or an entity that develops an AI system, puts it in the market or seeks to put it in the market. Then the deployer is, well, you might know, like the deployer is a person who is using an AI system under their authority, not including for personal use and non-professional activities, but for more professional activities. Then an importer is a person in the EU who imports AI systems. A distributor, this is other than a provider or an importer, makes the AI system available in the market. An authorized representative is an entity that carries out AI Act compliance on the provider's behalf. And an operator is actually all of the above, anybody who is involved with the development and deployment of an AI system. Then, as for timeline, since we all know that it's quite a sensitive time for the AI Act, some of you might know that it's about to be published soon. In fact, by the end of July, maybe August, it will be published in the official journal. Once published, 20 days after its publication, it would come into force. And this would mean that 6 months after, the bans on prohibited AI systems, prohibited AI practices take place. Then, as the diagram shows, 12 months after it's been published, the provisions of general purpose AI models apply, except for the penalties for now. And by this time, member states must also designate notifying authorities. Then 24 months later, everything except rules on Annex 1 of high-risk AI systems takes place. Just as a reminder, Annex 1 were these systems that are already kind of covered by existing regulations. So we talk about medical devices, critical infrastructure, and so on. And then lastly, 36 months after its publication, so at this point we see ourselves in February 2027, more or less, rules on Annex 1 of high-risk AI systems come into play. Now, once these come into play, we should be aware of the penalties that involve with not being compliant with the rules of this regulation. And there are 3 types of penalties. So penalties for non-compliance with the prohibited AI rules. So for those that are the prohibited AI practices, the penalty will be 25 million or up to 7% of global annual turnover. For non-compliance with other obligations, it would be 15 million or up to 3% of global annual turnover. And then supplying incorrect, incomplete, or misleading information to regulators would mean that there is a 7.5 million fine or up to 1% of global annual turnover as a penalty. Um, Here, I just wanted to quickly display Annex 1, so the high-risk AI systems that are covered in other regulations. So this is one of the things about the AI Act, that it does align with existing regulation. And I also wanted to take this slide as a chance to explain or mention why I think, or why we think that Nemco customers should care about the AI Act, because based on this list, and we know as Nemco that we are involved in helping clients and customers from many of the industries listed here, meaning if you are a provider or a deployer of an AI system in these industries, you are very likely to be subject to high risk AI requirements. And if you're sitting in the audience right now, you might be identifying yourself in one of as being part of some of these industries and having a role in it, either as a provider or a distributor or importer, even. And you may even know, you may know which role you have in the AI ecosystem. And in the case that you're not sure which role you have in the AI ecosystem, then you would want to find out, because it is, even though you may not be a provider of an AI system, it could be likely that you are a deployer, as a lot of people actually end up falling into the deployer category. Your employees may be using AI nowadays to streamline some processes, maybe for generating content or streamlining the making of some reports. And so then you will be considered a deployer of an AI system, and you have to put the AI governance structures, appropriate structures in place in order to use AI responsibly. And if you would know for sure, oh no, I'm not we do not deal with AI systems, or I'm no provider and I'm no deployer, then it is likely that you could become one in the next 2, 3, 5 years, because we all know, and I mean, there is a reason that you are attending this webinar, that the use of AI is becoming more and more prominent, and if you're using it or not, your competitors might be using it. At the end of the day, it does give you a competitive advantage. So it is likely that you do end up using it. But the message that I wanted to put out there is that even if you do use AI for competitive advantage, the actual advantage that you would be if you use it responsibly. And if you comply with these kind of regulations with the EU AI Act, because not only will you be compliant with it, but you would also foster customer trust and be prepared if supervisory authorities come around. So that was my note on that. And then here I just wanted to show the Annex 3 high-risk AI systems, so the standalone high-risk AI systems that are listed in the EU AI Act. So if you haven't identified yourself in Annex 1, you may be identifying yourself in Annex 3. So that is it for the overview, for the presentation. I didn't want to make it too long, and I'm very sorry if I went a bit fast. So yeah, I think it's time for a bit of a discussion, and I want to take the chance that we have Guru here to ask a few questions, or maybe to start with, Guru, do you have some initial remarks? Anything that's in your head right now that you want to say, or maybe you would rather I ask you a question?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I think first of all, the UA Act is quite large, quite comprehensive. I think you did a decent job distilling that down to the key components, and we'll go through that again. I think it's helpful to repeat some of these points to the audience. But to pull back up, what I would suggest is, it's not just the EU AI Act. In fact, if I can share something.
Yeah.
second. There's many different laws and regulations, and there's business risk, right? So the way I think about this is two types of risks. There's regulatory compliance risk, and then there's business risk, right?
Mhm.
When it comes to the different laws and regulations, hopefully the audience can see this. The EU AI Act, which I'm highlighting here, is but one regulation amongst dozens and dozens of regulations, right? And there are already many others in effect. There's several states in the US that have already passed laws, and each one seems to be getting broader and broader. The first one started out quite narrow, but the most recent ones, Utah and Colorado, are a bit broader. And the EU Act, of course, will be quite broad, and we expect legislation in New York State and California and Massachusetts to pass later this year. That'll also be quite broad in terms of the scope, the sectors that are covered, and the expectations of what a company must do from a governance standpoint, right? So I just want to kind of place the EU AI Act in this broader context. Now, my expectation is the EU AI Act will have much larger penalties, right? So I think that is generally the case vis-a-vis US states. But that being said, the penalties could be quite large in the US as well. And again, California and New York State, especially, I think will be pretty broad and dramatic. So that's one piece. The other piece to keep in mind is business risk, right? So there's a lot of stuff outside the scope of this that you will have to watch out for, like you do any technology, right? So there was a recent lawsuit with Air Canada on their customer-facing chatbot that had nothing to do with regulation. There's no specific regulation in Canada per se around laws yet, at least. It could happen, but nothing yet. But what happened was a customer was using Air Canada's chatbot. They were misled. They were given misinformation about the refund policy. And then they went ahead and bought the ticket and tried to get a refund, and they couldn't, right? And so they sued Air Canada, and they ended up winning the lawsuit. And so the key thing from that lawsuit was that Air Canada could not shift the blame to the provider solely, right? They had responsibility since it was ultimately their technology. And so I want to again place this more broadly in the context of there's regulatory risk and there's business risk. And that may seem like a lot. It may seem like, hey, is it worth it to invest in AI when you have all of these risks? And I would posit, that's a business decision for you to make ultimately. But as Monica said, this is a transformative technology that your competitors are going to be using, everyone's going to be using. And so, part of this is not only a cost of doing business, but building that trust. And the analogy I like to give is imagine 100 years ago, you were a car manufacturer. And in the early days of the motor vehicle, there was no seatbelt, there was no dashboard, there was no sensors, there was no speed limit, there was no regulations around cars and motor vehicles. And adoption was quite slow, right? Because there was a lack of trust about this new and very powerful technology. So if you're in the business of building AI and selling AI, or if you're in the business of wanting to use AI, then trust really, really matters, right? It's not just a regulatory thing. It's like your customers need to trust that this technology works well. And so to that extent, you're going to want to invest in governance, right? It is not a cost of doing business per se, but it is actually the thing that is going to allow you to take off. And I think that's a really important point that Monica mentioned and that I want to stress as well. So maybe we start there kind of in terms of why this is important and why you all should be thinking about this and placing the EU AI Act within that broader landscape.
Yeah, 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 exactly. I think that those were good points, Guru. I really liked that analogy of the car. And you mentioned like I guess the main message is what you need. It's to build a strong AI governance within your organization. And how would you explain it to someone? Like where would you start? Like I can imagine most people are like, okay, sure, I get it. Where do I start though? So in more simple terms, where would you start now if you're facing this, not just the AI Act, like you mentioned, all these other regulations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are 5 components to good governance, right? The first is inventorying and risk assessment, right? So in order to have good governance around something, you have to know what you have. And so inventorying your AI assets, whether they're high risk, low risk, medium risk, you should inventory everything and then do a risk assessment to understand where you have high risk, where you have low risk, where you have medium risk, and so on, right? So that's kind of the first step. The second piece to good governance in the AI world is humans in the loop. And you guys have probably heard that phrase before, but this is very important. right? For the foreseeable future, humans must be in the loop from an accountability standpoint. And this includes people who are developing the AI systems in your organization, so the data scientists and software engineers and others. It includes the executives who approve these systems or who are get it ready for deployment. And it includes any risk officers or compliance officers you may have, any stakeholder inside your organization that plays a role with regards to decision making around these AI systems. So that's the next thing. Establish those roles and responsibilities. The third thing is your policies and controls, right? If something goes wrong, what is your remediation policy? If people are using your AI systems, what is your transparency policy? Who are you going to share with, and how much are you going to share? Right? There's a slew of kind of policies that you need to develop that again we can talk through in the course of this conversation, but you need to have a view on those things. For instance, a lot of these regulations, EU AI Act included, they don't get into the nuts and bolts of what your policy should look like. They might tell you, hey, you need a remediation policy. Hey, you need a transparency policy. But it's up to you at some level to flesh out those details. And so that third bucket is really fleshing out the policies that you want to have as an organization, depending on your risk level and so on and so forth. Fourth is regulatory compliance, right? We're just talking about the EU AI Act. There's going to be a dozen other laws that you need to be compliant with over time. And then the last piece is testing and evaluating and monitoring your systems, right? There's a whole set of things you need to monitor for. Monica already mentioned bias is one of the most important things. But there's other things depending on the system, right? Model drift, hallucinations, toxicity, reliability, and so on and so forth. So, but these are the 5 pillars of what good governance looks like.
Great. Yeah, I think that those pillars make it very clear. I think it's the thing I always think about when just because you mentioned stakeholder involvement at a high level and a lower level, I always think about the typical issue of people. I mean, with AI, we always encounter socio-technical problems. It's like a technical system that is normally applied into social contexts in some way or another. So we need stakeholders involved from all domains. And the problem that I often find is that people do not talk the same language. You will see like AI developers trying to talk with lawyers about AI and regulation and the features that the AI should have in order to meet certain requirements. And sometimes I often see that developers get a bit frustrated, like it's impossible, we cannot do this. It's like it's hard, like it's. I feel like there's always a bit of a miscommunication there, and I'm seeing that with the regulatory developments that are happening with the EU AI Act, that is a bit on the higher level. It doesn't tell you very like what to do at a technical level. It does promote things like the creation of standards, and I believe in the next 2 years, like standards are going to come out in order to facilitate the implementation of the AI Act. And I think that's also something to take into account that can help in these governance structures. So not only do you need stakeholders from different domains helping with their expertise, but we can also, or we should implement these governance structures around also the implementation of standards and technical guidances that can be applied on a day-to-day by the AI developer.
I think that's a really good point. And you're starting to see that, right? Your audience members may or may not be familiar with the NIST RMF, which the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US has been blessed by the White House to kind of lead the way around AI, good, responsible AI standards for organizations building AI and deploying AI in the United States. You have ISO, which is a kind of a global standard that is building out their own set of standards. You have AI Verify out in Asia that is building out their set of standards. And I do want to call out, as we've dug into this, and I'm sure you have as well, Monica, the standards overlap quite a bit with each other. There's almost like 80-90% overlap with each other, and overlap with the laws and regulations. So with the EU AI Act or the California law that's moving its way through, there's quite a lot of overlap. And so I think that's should be heartening to people that, okay, look, the world is starting to develop a common view of what good AI governance looks like. And it's, again, it comes down to those pillars that I talked about, because these standards and these laws, they're not working in a vacuum. They're not starting from scratch. They borrow from existing governance programs like conformity assessments in the product and electronics space that NEMCO is such an expert in, or in the SR 11.7, which is a type of model risk management in the financial services space, right? Like experts have thought about these problems before. They've developed ideas and standards around how to govern complex technologies. And AI is that next complex technology. This isn't, brand new, starting from scratch idea around governance. So I think we are starting to develop good views on what good governance looks like.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I think I did want to ask you a question, Guru, but I feel like maybe we already talked about it because you talked about how to implement a good AI governance framework. Would you see that's the only thing you need in order to comply with the AI Act, or is there like pieces of the puzzle missing there? Like,
Yeah, and if you're okay, let me just share. Actually, I should be able to share screen here. And I can send out this link with your presentation as well if you're planning to share,
yeah,
Monica.
yeah, I will share the slides for everybody who was wondering.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have a link here that goes into a lot of detail, step by step, what you need to do. The first things I would argue that you really need to do is what kind of company are you, right? And Monica hit on this. Are you a provider? Are you a deployer? Are you a distributor? Sometimes you can be more than one, right? And so you have to really figure out which type of institution you are, because each one has different set of requirements. So that's kind of the first piece of the puzzle. And then the second thing is really figuring out, again, the inventorying and the risk assessment. Because you need to
Yeah.
look at not just the ones you have already, but also look at your roadmap of AI technologies. As Monica mentioned, I'm sure all of you are thinking about building AI solutions over the next 6 months, year, etc. So think through what is the risk level of each of these. And of course, the unacceptable risk is the one that the UA Act at least says you should not be building. But many, 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 many things are going to fall into the high risk bucket, right? And Monica went through that quite nicely, both existing regulations, but also the new buckets. And if I can show you that, I think it's worth actually spending a second on those um, new buckets. So give me 1 second. And here you go, right? So, and this also came up in a question in the chat, but I think there's like 6 buckets of things here to think about, right? One is biometrics, right? Emotional recognition, visual software, those kinds of things will fall under the high risk bucket. Critical infrastructure, right? Things like infrastructure, transportation, water, gas, electricity, anything in those areas will fall under the high risk bucket.
I think just a quick note,
Yeah, of
just for
course.
our audience over here, I think critical infrastructure is a very relevant one from the
Yeah.
industry perspective, because that means like any safety components within not just critical infrastructure but also digital critical infrastructure
Mhm.
come within that scope, I believe. So for people in the audience, that might be a point to look into, to focus on.
And one thing I'll just add on here, I know you talked about the definition of AI. I do want to pause on that for a second, right? It's not just generative AI. I know everyone is talking these days about
Oh no.
GPT-4 and Claude and these language models and these chatbots. Absolutely, of course, that falls under the definition of AI, but so do statistical models that you're using to make predictions. And so I want to be very clear about this, right? AI, many of you are already using AI. I'd be quite certain of that. Many of you already have statistical models that make predictions, that are used to make recommendations, and are used to generate content, right? Those are the 3 buckets I put it into, right? Making predictions, making recommendations, and generating content. And so, especially if you have machine learning models, statistical models that are used to make predictions, that are part of your software, that are part of your technology, and they happen to be in the space of critical infrastructure, absolutely, absolutely, that's going to fall under scope. So I just want to make that clear. Um, Educational training, right? Of course, this is so important when it comes to assessing students, training students, helping them learn all of those things. Employment, the employment space is a big one, right? When you're talking about hiring of workers, when you're talking about not even beyond that, internal things like pay or promotions, all of these things, if you're using statistical models or AI, that is going to fall under scope of high risk. Essential private services, some of these can be government services. So for instance, benefits and public programs and those sorts of things, but also private services like lending and insurance. So if you're in the lending or insurance spaces, and like I said before, lending is already one that has been regulated for some time, has strict kind of model risk management practices, and those will now extend into AI, at least in the US, right? So all of that will be there, and then law enforcement, right? So criminal justice and law enforcement. So these are the buckets of things that you would, if you're working on, if you have AI, it would fall under high risk. Again, we'll share all this in more details in the when Monica shares out the materials.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I think those buckets are quite useful to look at. But yeah, I believe those were from the standalone AI system. So of course we shouldn't forget that Annex 1 of the AI Act. So this list that I showed earlier. I'm not sure if I should show the list again. So this one over here, also any AI system that is involved within the regulations that cover these industries are also considered high-risk AI systems. So yeah, I would say that there is a lot to do, right, Guru? There is a lot to do. There's a lot of work to do, not just for companies like yours, for companies like ours, but for regulators, for people developing standards, for policymakers. So yeah, would you say that it is possible to create a good governance structure that is able not just to make sure that you comply with the AI Act, because like you said, it's not the only regulation out there, like there's plenty of them. Would you say it is possible to create a structure that keeps you in line with all the at least like a good amount of regulations and frameworks that are out there? So for example, one that keeps you in line with not just the AI Act, but the risk management framework from NIST and maybe other more specific regulations like the one from New York or Utah. Yeah, what do you think about that?
And look, that's what we're here to help with. Can I share screen?
Yeah, of course.
One of the things is, and maybe this is a good segue into how NEMCO and FairNow can help your clients here. But look, governance can be a lot of work, right? So there's a lot to do from, as I mentioned already, inventorying, tracking the laws and regulations, monitoring your program, your software, and your AI. And then the other thing is documentation. So again, as I mentioned, I was an executive at Capital One, had AI teams. I owned AI governance for parts of the organization. And so we had to spend a lot of time on that. And one of the things that takes up a lot of time is kind of governance workflow and documentation. You have to document a lot of things. And Monica, if you see in the EU AI Act, there's a whole section on the things you need to document, the tests that you need to document, the evidencing you need to do. You need to be able to show, hey, what's the intent of this thing? Is it following the intent, right? There's a bunch of different documents, from model cards to validation documents to testing documents and so on and so forth. So it is a fair amount of work, right? And this is where I think the combination of human resources and technology can be helpful, right? And that's the role that we're playing in partnering with NEMCO, where NEMCO is obviously an expert on kind of assessing and advising on good governance and compliance. And what we provide is the technology to help you with it, right? Like, where do you want to inventory and track your models? How do you assess the risk around your AI applications? How do you track all the different regulations, as Monica said, not just the EU AI Act, but understanding all the other laws and regulations? Are you going to be tracking all of this yourself? that means you got to hire a bunch of people, right? And so we help with that. Our technology automates and helps simplify a lot of the aspects of governance that you see on this page, whether it's tracking laws, whether it's doing risk assessments, whether it's helping you with inventorying and workflow management, whether it's even doing bias tests, and ultimately whether it's automating kind of documentation. It helps be that kind of central hub that you can use to as part of your governance program, and hopefully helps you simplify all of this. Because otherwise, I've been through it. I've been on the other side. If you do it all manually, it can take up a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It can take up a lot of time, and I think I think you were explaining it very well. This FairNow can help with this with using an automated tool, and I think combining that with people who can help you, who can, in very simple terms, hold your hand, walk you through it, and explain to you in detail how to implement your governance structure tailored to your organization, because we know not all are the same. It's not like a one glove fits all kind of ordeal. So what we as Nemco can help you with is do exactly this. So we can help you also with this AI, with doing this AI inventory, with doing a regulatory impact assessment, checking, okay, which regulations actually apply to you, like where are you based? Are you based in the US, in the EU? Do you intend to put your products in the EU AI market? Also identifying who you are, because that is sometimes easy, sometimes not so much to identify where you fall in the AI ecosystem, because you could have multiple roles. You doesn't have to be that you're only the provider. So that's also very important to know. And of course, like Nemco can also help you to do like a gap analysis against these important regulations, not just the AI Act, but risk management framework like Guru mentioned before, and so on. And I think these kind of processes, along with a automated tool like FairNows, can do a lot when it comes to implementing AI governance and staying in line with regulations, frameworks, and standards that are, some of them are out already and more to come. So yeah.
A good analogy, Monica, is imagine trying to do, when your finance department has to do taxes and audits on your financial situation. Imagine trying to do that with a team of people just using Excel or something like that. It just, that wouldn't
Takes
happen.
too much time.
You're not going to do
No
that,
way.
right? They have external auditors and consultants that they work with. They have a technology and a software that they work with that streamlines it and makes it all simpler. And you're going to see that more and more, not just in tax compliance, but you're going to see that in technology and AI compliance. And so this is where the field is moving. And yeah, if you try to do it all yourself, it's going to be pretty daunting.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well,
Monica, any questions in the chat that you want to quickly take on? I saw a few come in. Any thoughts on kind of the regulations evolving in the next 36 months in the EU AI Act?
Other than the EU AI Act, or what? Yeah, I guess I wanted to, I mean, I do believe that there's going to be a lot of movement after the AI Act. There's this thing called the Brussels effect. Some of you may know what it is, and some of you may agree or not agree with it. But I do believe it has some influence in some way or another. So I do expect a lot of regulatory developments taking place in the next few months in other countries. But when it comes to specifically the AI Act, what developments do we see coming forward after it's in force? Well, the AI office was just set up, and I believe, like I said earlier, we're also going to have standards being published, I believe probably in the next 2 years. So by and then they're gonna contribute to the preparation of harmonized standards, which will play a crucial role when implementing the AI Act or when wanting to follow its requirements. Then we're gonna see that guidelines are gonna be well, there are already guidelines out there, but there's gonna be more guidelines coming out, implementing and of delegated acts, and I believe, yeah, I think those are one of the few things, along with some regulatory sandboxes that some member states are gonna implement. So we are gonna see a lot of movement in the next few months, well, years, of course, but especially now with the AI Act coming out. As for questions, I'm trying to get out the Q&A. Apologies if I haven't been very attentive of it.
I think questions around biometrics and stoves in particular.
Yeah, biometrics is I think Guru mentioned them earlier in one of the 6 containers that you showed from your website. Biometrics is a difficult one. I think people often tend to get confused with biometrics because there are different types of biometric techniques. Like there's biometric categorization, identification, and so on, and that often has its own place in the act. Some of them are considered high risk, and some of them not. I think biometric. One of them is a prohibited AI practice. So with biometrics is a tricky one. I recommend if you have a very specific question about biometrics, if you're involved with biometrics, you can email me, or you can email digital@nemco.com, and we can have a chat, or I can reply to you on very specific questions about it. I feel like now, because of time, I don't have time to dive into this discussion. And I believe the other question I replied privately, Guru. So I think for the sake of time, then maybe we should close this off. But thank you, everybody who attended the webinar. It was very interesting. Thank you, Guru, for joining us. I really like talking to you about these
Thank you for having me.
topics. So yeah, feel free to email me privately, or to digital@nemco.com if you're interested in our services, or if you have any questions. Of course, you can also email Guru, or any questions about how we can both help you separately or together. We're more than happy to answer.
Yeah, my email is guru@fairnow.ai. And thanks for having me, Monica, and talk to everyone soon.
Yeah, talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.